The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final webinar of our September Fraud Month series. It's been an exciting month, a lot of information shared, a lot of insights. The last one focusing a little bit on KYC, know your customer. And the question might be as to why are we doing it? Why are we doing this session? Well, you know, there are plenty of requirements out there, especially from a federal and state level for us when it comes to processing payments and or accepting business partners, etc. So we want to reflect a little bit on what those requirements are, and therefore we have our legal counsel here today, and we'll do some introductions in a little bit. But we want to really share some of those insights and, you know, again, look at best practices around identifying your customer, why it is important, and explaining a little bit more as to what's required from you as an agency, us as a merchant provider, or the airline as a merchant, and just creating some awareness or additional knowledge around the importance of accepting those card payments or new business partners in your environments. I'm Cornelius Hattingh. I am the Director of Revenue Integrity, and always with me is my esteemed colleague, Doug.
Hi, I'm Doug Nass, the Director of Fraud Investigations at ARC, and been doing this in the industry for the last 26 years. So as we go through, I'm going to add a lot of hopefully color commentary to what's going on and give you some real life examples of what we see and what we've seen over the years when it comes, you know, when you're not sure who you're doing business with. So next up is Sohum Karia. So on to you, Sohum.
Thanks, Doug. Hi, I'm Sohum Karia. I'm the senior counsel with ARC. Been with ARC since 2019, so not quite the 26 years that Doug has under his belt, but I definitely work closely with Doug and Cornelius, and we put our heads together constantly on these types of issues. So I'm glad to be here and to be able to contribute at least to the legal aspect of the discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm going to keep you going here. So if you can give us a little bit more background as to legislation and so forth around KYC.
Definitely. And then I'll just real quick, I'll start with the note at the bottom, just kind of a disclaimer. You know, the information that we provide in the presentation is not intended to constitute legal advice. It's all here for general informational purposes only, and it may not constitute the most up-to-date legal or other information. So the views that we express here are not of our own individual views, but they are our own individual views that are not the views of Airlines Reporting Corporation. So just you know, it wouldn't be a legal presentation without a disclaimer. So and so I'll move back up to the top of the slide in terms of legal context and background. So, you know, the idea of KYC, it really has its roots in the banking context. So started with primarily the modern incarnation of it was the Bank Secrecy Act from 1970, and that required financial institutions to, you know, keep records of certain cash purchases, file reports for transactions exceeding $10,000, which many of you may have heard about, and also to report suspicious activity. And suspicious activity, you know, it could be pretty broad, but so examples would be, you know, unusual financial connections and transactions among certain types of businesses. So, for example, a food importer dealing with an auto parts exporter, there's not really sort of a you know, an intuitive connection there. So that could be potentially considered a suspicious activity that you want to report, or unusually complex series of transactions that make it seem like, you know, they're trying to sort of hide the origins of the source of the funds, you know, and so they would involve multiple bank accounts, multiple parties, jurisdictions, etc. And then also one that, you know, I know we've kind of seen in our experience at ARC, but like a sudden uptick in transactions being conducted or a sudden burst of activities within a short period of time, especially maybe if the account was previously dormant. So things like that are sort of part of the Bank Secrecy Act. And interestingly, travel agents, they are included in the definition of a financial institution under that law. But remember that was back in 1970 originally, and it was passed. That was an era where travelers' checks were a lot more common, and they were often sold by travel agencies. So it was kind of a different world. But since 1990, the actual enforcement of this law has been done by the Treasury Department, specifically Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN. And they've issued regulations which do not include travel agents as, financial institutions, which is a little bit more, I think, intuitive and makes more sense to everybody. And so in practice, really, if we're talking about just sort of money laundering, the risk is really if a travel agency were to receive a large amount of cash, maybe over 10,000 in one transaction, then per IRS rules, that would need to be reported. But there's no actual reporting requirement for the companies that are present in this webinar under the Bank Secrecy Act. There also could be risk in terms of money laundering if travel agencies are associated with or have common ownership of money services businesses, money transfer, check cashing, that type of thing. There is a possibility that if you wanted to avoid reporting a transaction as a travel agent, you could, and if you also have a money services business, you could route the transactions through the travel side instead of the more regulated money services business side, and thereby try to sort of avoid detection. Also, a money launderer could buy an expensive airline ticket for someone who could then exchange it for a refund that looks legitimate. So that's just sort of like the general circumstances of how money laundering would be relevant to a travel agency. And so I think in time after more recently with the Patriot Act of 2001, that was kind of the next major piece of sort of money laundering or KYC legislation. And so at a high level, it basically required financial institutions to better identify and monitor the origin and destination of funds flowing through them. This was kind of the basis for this was the findings after the attacks that the perpetrators were able to receive financing through a combination of U.S. and foreign banks to support their criminal activities. So the Patriot Act definitely intended to clamp down on that. And then the other kind of final legal consideration is sort of economic sanctions. It's distinct, but it's definitely very related. And these are primarily issued and enforced by the Office of Foreign Asset Control, which you may have heard of in the Treasury Department. And that can be an important part of the KYC process in terms of essentially dictating who we can do business with, mainly based on geographical sort of concerns, political concerns. And so we'll get into that more later. Cornelius, if you want to go to the next slide.
All right, actually, let me just comment.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I recall during the Great Recession, we actually had an agency owner whose business was going down, pulled out corporate clients' credit cards and started running up incredibly expensive tickets, and they were going to disappear overseas, and they were going to exchange through various means. I'm not going to lay out how they did it, but it was about $500,000 that they were going to go overseas with funds before, but we were able to unravel it. And then also the agency owner did something very, very stupid on their own. But that's something that has happened in the industry. Just stealing and go hide overseas during the Great Recession.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Oh, sorry, jumping ahead.
No, thanks, Cornelius. Yeah. So as I was, discussing before, given the various laws and regulations that are focused on sort of money laundering and things of that nature, what stemmed from that has been the development of KYC, Know Your Customer principles. And so there's sort of three overarching categories that we'll discuss today. The first one being, the initial customer identification. They identify themselves and, could provide documentation, and then it's our job to verify. And then due diligence is sort of related, but to learn more about the customer and their business, if applicable, and develop a risk-based profile of the customer. And then the final piece is just the ongoing monitoring, and you're looking for any red flags based on their, sort of the customer's activity on an ongoing basis. Behavior preferences, changes, things of that nature. Next slide, please, Cornelius.
Yep.
Thank you. So just related to that, like, I think the question that Cornelius had alluded to earlier was, why is this important in our industry? Especially, we don't really fall within the sort of traditional conception of financial institutions or banks, as I was, mentioning before. So these aren't sort of necessarily like specific concrete legal requirements per se, but there's still some risk associated with not having any level of KYC, and that's really sort of the key as to the quick answer as to why it's necessary. And so the first piece of that is regulatory risk, both on the federal and state level. Federal and state regulators are active in terms of enforcing not only money laundering, but also fraud on end consumers. So for example, the FTC and state attorneys general, they receive complaints from consumers about, maybe misrepresentations that, for example, travel agency made to them, potentially representing themselves as being from an airline. So things like that. And then the Department of Transportation also focuses on airline and travel agency business practices, more like sort of advertising and, ticket refunds and things of that nature, which I'm sure, most of you are aware of. And then, there could be a significant cost. Even if there's no violations found, there could be significant cost to just responding to these. If there's an investigation or inquiry, you might have to, most likely you'll have to have outside counsel. And so, those costs tend to add up. And so, and then beyond that, if there's an enforcement action, that could even be more financial costs in terms of civil penalties, maybe even criminal penalties, depending on how egregious the conduct is, and not to mention the reputational impact, of course. So those are some risks to consider. And then aside from sort of the government angle, there's always the possibility of private litigation. So if a travel agent, this is just an example, but if an agent were to engage in fraud against sort of the purchases of airline tickets, it's plausible that either or both of the airline and agent could be, subject to litigation, at least initially, by having somebody assert their claim in a court against sort of our industry and our entities. So that's another sort of separate risk to be mindful of. And then also there's just the actual impact of fraud, primarily, sort of the financial loss, due to fraud committed by customers that have not been properly vetted. And in our industry, we definitely see that in terms of chargebacks and as well as airline debit memos. And I think, Doug, you had something to add on that.
Yeah, definitely. Many years we've seen numerous examples where someone brought in a agent. They really didn't do any vetting on them, allowed them into the system. And beyond, like I said, the most common fraud we see, of course, is the chargebacks. That's the easiest with compromised cards. But oh boy, with things like agents running without anyone at the host agency knowing, high dollar tickets with high commissions on them. MCOs in which 100% commission is taken, and the host agent doesn't really know what's going on. It might go for months and months before the debit memos start to roll in, and it's not credit card fraud, but that sub agent or that rogue inside agent is doing something that they shouldn't, and they really, we've seen some very incredibly serious dollar amounts involved in the, 6 figures before anyone at the host or main agency even knew what was going on. And there's not a lot of agencies, especially brick and mortar, mom and pop, that they can't really take those types of hits. So it really does it may ruin the business, obviously.
Yeah. And just adding to that, I mean, this is not just, for you as in travel agency booking on behalf of someone else as a customer or traveler, doing that KYC of that traveler. That's not where it ends, right? It's also who you're doing business with, who do you sign up, your consolidator, host agency, and you signing up out of business. Who are they? What do they do? Where did they get their experience from, etc. And of course, ARC is here for the airlines, right? So we ultimately provide that accreditation to the agency community to give that stamp of approval to say, look, we've done necessary due diligence already. ARC does do a lot of due diligence of an accredited agent. So the airlines rely on that accreditation piece, but with the knowledge that ARC is doing the necessary due diligence, necessary KYC, OFAC checks, etc., that's required for agencies to have the ability to transact in this environment, be it on the ARC Pay merchant account, be it on airline merchant account, etc. That's why entities like ARC exist, and IATA and those guys. That's why we're here, and that's that reliance. So we do all of these checks, but it's important for you and we'll get into that a little bit later, but as a host agency consolidator, knowing who you're doing business with, and also as a smaller agency who maybe has a very focused itineraries or focused tours, etc. Make sure double check who you're doing business with at times. It's always helpful to see and validate those your customers.
Mm-hmm. And we know through the history that some of these bad actors, they will get caught at agency A, but that really doesn't stop them. They just go and sign up with agency B, and then they get kicked out of agency B and they go to agency C, leaving a trail of financial destruction behind them. And that's where, we really rely on our agent partners here to, let us know what's going on. Who were you dealing with? They might be on our radar already. But these are the bad actors that we're trying to, keep out of the system.
Thanks, guys. And so, yeah, just building on that, for all the reasons just mentioned, it's very beneficial for our industry to incorporate at least some aspects of KYC. And so we can go through the sort of the 3 principles or categories that I mentioned earlier. But just as a reminder, with the understanding that these are not strict legal requirements for our industry per se, because the laws and regulations are sort of, heavily focused towards financial institutions. But so from our perspective, given all the risks, the potential risks, that these are definitely best practices that we should, make our best efforts to incorporate. And not to mention, given that all of our businesses are connected to the financial system, to banks and financial institutions, implementing these standards, or at least being aware of them, sometimes that could just be a requirement of doing business with certain banks. I think they may have certain expectations when they're doing their due diligence on you, and say, do you have these processes in place? And we've definitely been asked that question before, so it wouldn't surprise me if others have as well. So just going to the first category of KYC, customer identification, the minimum standards, pretty self-explanatory. I think most of us have experienced this on a personal level when trying to open a bank account, just provide basic identification. And then, our job as those sort of doing the KYC is to verify the individual or entity's identity. So there's 2 sort of categories of that: documentary verification, which is looking at the documents that they provide or that they've been asked to provide, driver's license, passports, things of that nature. But there's also non-documentary, which the distinction is basically we use sources other than the documents that the customer themselves provide. So, nowadays a lot of it is done electronically, so known as e-ID verification or EIDV. And then it's cross-checked with various databases, credit bureaus, public records, things like that. And often, I'm sure that a lot of a lot of us, I know ARC is, are using sort of third-party vendors who specialize in these services. And there are alternatives to the EIDV, like checking references or obtaining financial statements, things like that. But more often than not, the EIDV is just faster, more reliable, and tends to be generally more cost-effective. So it seems to be the better way to go, or the primary way to go. And then the last point about business entity verification, that's just clarifying that, like ARC, if your customers are business entities such as corporations, partnerships, or trusts, then in terms of identification, in that context, it would focus on things such as, doing an asset search, verifying the customer's assets, and maybe more importantly, determining who the beneficial owners are, and then doing separate KYC checks on those individuals specifically. So just kind of pointing out that nuance. Next slide, please, Cornelius.
Yeah, so before I move on to that next slide, this is our 6th webinar in this month, and at the beginning I forgot the most important part, and that was just general housekeeping, right? So let me just jump in here for a minute and do that. Can't believe I forgot that, but it's essential that the audience, that you participate with us here and ask questions as we go. And again, to ask questions, there's a menu bar for GoToWebinar with a section called Questions. Please feel free to type in your questions there. We're constantly monitoring that environment for it comes up, so that we can respond to you as well. So it's not just a one-sided environment. So we do like getting in those questions. In addition, these webinars are recorded and will be posted out. There'll be links sent out later on. But do feel free to go and find these on our website. We've got a YouTube environment where you can download these and show it to your teams, etc. So share the knowledge of the entire month with everybody within your organization as well. So sorry for that. So I'll move on to the next slide now.
Oh, it's fine. Better late than never, Cornelius. Okay, so thanks. Now you're following up to sort of the identification and verification piece. The second step is due diligence. It's somewhat similar to the previous stage, but you're focusing not necessarily on who you're dealing with, but kind of what about them is relevant, and what are they, sort of how do they operate in terms of the nature of their business, where they are geographically. Just the object is to kind of just do some dig up facts and see what that gets you, basically. And taking together the first two steps of identification and due diligence, that really helps us to build a risk profile for the customer. So just as an example, I know one thing that we look at in terms of customer location and then the source and destination of funds, which are some of the factors here, is whether there are any applicable sanctions, economic sanctions. So we have an automated process at ARC that sort of cross-checks against the multiple OFAC sanctions lists. And so that really helps us kind of identify any potential issues. And just, keep in mind that the sanctions can be against a person, they could be against an entity, or also, an entire country, for example, North Korea. So there can be nuances there, and they also may not always involve travel services. Sometimes the sanctions are just against one industry or one sort of issue that's prevalent with that part of the world. So any issues that come up in this area, of course, it's best to collaborate with your legal team on that. Doug, did you have something on this?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen issues over the years with companies that have signed up, agencies that have signed up overseas countries and then gotten themselves into ticketing that they never thought would occur. I know when I first started in the fraud area in the 90s, the big scheme was the Nigerian ticket exchange. The currency at the time in Nigeria was non-convertible, but they were using agency tickets brought out in the fistful out of Nigeria, and they were exchanging them through U.S. accredited agencies, and it was millions and millions of dollars were at risk. So those are things, and I know it's an older example, and it would be difficult to pull today, but there's places in the world where there are certain types of sanctions. Maybe it's or places where it's tough to get money out of. We know that we've had agencies within the last couple of years that have had businesses, legit businesses, operating in places in South America that had difficulty transmitting, funds over $10,000 into the U.S. And it was a legit business down there, and they got a partner in the U.S. to do it. But because it looked suspicious, the bank was holding funds back before they could determine what was going on. What would happen is the agency couldn't get their funds in time for these cash settled tickets, causing bounce drafts at the agency. And the agency's like, well, yes, we issued the tickets, but the money hasn't come in from our partner overseas. And we're like, we understand, but that model is a very risky one. If you can't cover that draft, now your business is in jeopardy. So those are really, things that I've seen over the years where, you're working with overseas entities. We've had issues with agencies dealing out of the Ukraine. China, pulling money out of China has caused difficulties at times here in the U.S. So, like I said, it could be you have a legit overseas partner, you're legit yourselves, but because that flow of the funds through a bank is causing them to take a dive at it because it's going to generate a suspicious activity report, and they want to know why are these funds going in or out at these dollar amounts. So those are things you need to think through before dealing with an overseas entity.
No, absolutely. And I mean, not just dealing with businesses, but also the individuals. Doug, I know you've got a bunch of stories around people telling the agency, I'm a doctor, I need to go to one issue or another, right? Or, I'm part of this church group and we've got these guys going, yeah, I'm part of this university or something like that. Validate that they are truly with that university. Validate that they are who they say they are. Find a way to validate that individual. But building a little bit more on this, so aside from the individual, we're living in this environment where we have a lot of businesses, a lot of people operating out of home as well, and a lot of agencies that are providing hosting agencies the ability for any person to come in and work with them and operate with them. It's essential that when you do bring in those sub agents, that you vet them properly. I think one of the areas where there might be potential gaps are relying on industry partners, accreditations solely to vet your business partner on. There are many entities, including ARC, that you can reference for accreditation. You need to know the ins and outs of what those companies do and how they do the vetting, and then take some of those best practices and just validate it. Do some additional due diligence around that. Don't just take that stamp of approval that that individual is telling you they have at face value. Another thing is, think about your reputational impact. It's all good and well to have a financial instrument on hand to support you for financial losses, but the entire travel ecosystem is connected to that single transaction. Transactions that are happening throughout that process, those ADMs, those chargebacks, those all have an impact on in our environment. It has an impact on us as the merchant, especially in the ARC Pay world, on how that's affecting us. But to you as a host agency, your ACN number is the one being flagged every time something goes wrong. So think about that. Think about the cost of running that ABM through your systems, running that chargeback through your system, spending that chargeback. Think about the cost that's involved in there. So, it's not always just, a financial loss or fraud that's happening there. It's also an effort and a resource drain for you to manage all of this.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on, we find this all the time where fraudsters, they do their research online, especially for big international, either corporations or institutions. I know one of the fraud analysts, Christine, last week just had to convince an agency they have a contract with the United Nations. But we saw, or she saw, a specific ticketing that's like, this is not quite right, and had to go back, communicating back and forth about 3 or 4 times to get that agency to realize they weren't dealing with the real United Nations, their real customer. This happens all the time where you have to convince that, usually a corporate travel agent, you're not dealing with who you think you are. It's a broken record. It's you got to remember that these guys, that's their job, is as a bad guy. They're in effect black market travel agents themselves. Most of them operating, in parts of the world where, law enforcement can't go reach out and grab them. West Africa, parts of South America. And it does not take long, especially when you're talking about international tickets. Now that we have really seen all the fraudsters that disappeared in 2020 because so few people were traveling, they're all back in 2021. And it's whack-a-mole, but they have got their schemes. They're posing as your legit corporate clients, but there's something a little different about them. They're trying to come in as new corporate clients, and that's where that due diligence, even for existing customers, watch where you're mailing invoices to. Is it to an email address that is historically used on file, or is there something different? So, that's their business, is to dupe one agent a day. That's all they got to do. If they fail 99 times, and they get in that 100th time, then it's still a success. So those are things that the team is dealing with on an absolute daily basis.
Yeah, no, valid. So I've got a couple of questions in, guys. So let's take one or two of those real quick. Question is here: is it okay to have copies of driving licenses or passports, verification or confirmation of your customer? I don't think, I'll start the answer and you guys jump in, but I think in some instances we've seen that that alone is not sufficient. A lot of times the documents are doctored. We've got some examples on our website that Doug has gotten hold of over the years, and we've put them out there. So there's good guidelines there as to what to look for. It's again, even the cards, even if someone gives you a front and back of a credit, some of those are even photoshopped in one way or another. Now, from an ARC perspective, and I'm glad I've got my legal team here, is that we can't endorse that you have to do that. We can't endorse for you to take IDs or passports or front and backs of cards. That's your own decision to make. We need to take in consideration PII, PCI DSS compliance, and all those things as you manage this. But I think if you follow the guidelines set out in PCI DSS, managing credit card data, and PII, then you do what you need to do to validate that customer. Just make sure you get rid of that information in the right way, so that you're safe and there's no need for anyone to come after you as an agency. I don't know. So
yeah. I'll just I'll add to that. That's all. That I agree with that, Cornelius. We're not sort of banks or financial institutions, so there's no like actual requirement to collect physical or to examine physical IDs, passports, and things like that. But you know, I mean, it's just more authentic if you're able to actually, as Cornelius said, look at the real thing. So it's also like a sort of a risk reward question in terms of it is personal information. Privacy is a whole nother discussion, a whole nother webinar we could do. But yeah, you want to just be mindful that if you are collecting it and storing it, then you keep it for as minimal of a time period as possible. And if it falls within a credit card, then a PCI, then complying with those requirements as well. But in theory, it's better to always see the authentic one. Yes.
Yeah, and I just, we've long recommended it, but it's obviously each agency has their own policy. And in today's world, it will not protect you. It's not a remedy to a chargeback. But the reason we do recommend it, especially for new clients, is that a lot of these guys that are doing it, they stink at Photoshop. And when you get in that driver's license image, when they email it in, the passport, the front and back of the credit card, those are things where you need to, the image, enlarge it and look for anomalies. There's misspellings, there's oftentimes, they're putting these together very quick and they just want to blast it out to the travel agent who they think is going to accept the payment. And luckily, they make a lot of mistakes, misspellings and things that just look horrible, poor quality photos. We've seen celebrity photos and politician photos, and they're just grabbing it, the photo to put in the passport, and it's just it's just something they grabbed off the internet. It's someone's face, and they copy paste it into the electronic copy, and then they blast it off to the travel agent. So, if your agency policy is to grab that stuff, one time we had a picture of Harry Houdini from 1910. I kid you not.
And I think there's something clear differentiator here, Sohum, and you might correct me if I go wrong, but I think if you have a legitimate ID and it's legitimate and you validated that that's the person, follow PII rules. If you have a document that's fake, those rules, I assume those rules go out the window. So
that's actually an interesting question. I would think that is the case because it's not at risk of disclosing anyone's actual information. So I would say probably yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So just to differentiate between the two,
Yeah.
Sometimes if you've got fraud or suspicion of fraud, we ask for you to send that in, and 9 out of 10, if not 10 out of 10, those are fictitious documents. So that's so I just want to make sure we create that differentiation between the two.
And those are the mistakes that we want to capitalize on to say, aha, I'm not going to fall for this. It's like I said, it's sometimes the poor photoshopping abilities of these guys. Use it against them. That's what we say. Turn the tables, use it against them.
One more question before we move on into our red flags here is it a good idea to get some type of bonding insurance to protect the travel agent? I think we touched on that to say, it's just going to financially support you. It's not going to have a reputation. It's not going to support your reputation of it. So yes, it's always a good idea to, if you're dealing with a sub-agent, to have a financial instrument in place, especially if you're doing cash transactions. You want to secure that cash. There are other ways to deal with credit card fraud, but from a cash perspective, yeah, you definitely want to have something in place there with that agency. It's not going to protect you all the way. It's definitely an insurance policy, but it's all the way. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything there.
Especially if they're overseas. If that business partner is overseas or that sub-agent, if things go bad, how are you going to collect? It's probably not a road that you want to go down.
Thanks, guys. So I'll continue just, we've kind of touched on some of this, but the third piece of KYC is the monitoring on an ongoing basis for any red flags. Basically, you're just looking to see if there's any after the first 2 stages, you've kind of identified them and verified, you've done your due diligence and sort of, let them into the fold, so to speak. And then now you're just kind of monitoring to see if there's any changes in expected behavior or practices versus the risk profile that you developed in the first 2 stages, or if there's just any other, sort of unusual activity otherwise, anything that would be considered a possible red flag. And again, these are kind of, they have their base, these factors here, examples have their basis with sort of banks and financial institutions, and so they might not all be directly applicable to us, but the general categories are, I think, pretty relevant. So suspicious customer behavior, they want to sort of break down a large cash deposit or transaction into smaller amounts that are under the sort of legally required thresholds. That's one. Or kind of more relevant, at least for ARCs, is they're hesitant or reluctant to provide sort of normal information that would be requested. Since we do accreditation, that comes up from time to time. Cash transactions, I think we can all just sort of agree that just based on the nature of cash itself, that can be a red flag regardless of the specific industry. We're looking at the size of each individual cash transaction, and also, the overall frequency or volume. If that's beyond what would reasonably be expected for this particular customer, then, that would potentially be a red flag. I don't know, Doug, did you have something on that? I can't remember.
That one was, it was just about, you've got that overseas partner and you're on a cash basis with them. They're legit, you're legit, but your bank might view it very differently. And like I said, the number of times where the bank has held funds long enough to cause an agency to default. Those are things that definitely you need to take into consideration. If that bank doesn't have a clear idea or a track record, or if they're expecting, $20,000 a week and it goes to $120,000 a week, that's going to probably initiate a suspicious activity report, and someone may very well start to take a deeper dive and start holding back funds, which then puts potentially an agency into default for cash tickets. And that's, if you think about it, it's a very compressed time frame. Now that we've returned to the remitting, the 5-day remitting. So.
Yeah. Well, ensure that you have enough funds available to to bridge that type of potential hold by the bank. Just again, these things happen, and of course, political landscapes change these days overnight as well. So change, sanctions change all the time. So make sure you have safeguards in place as a best practice about doing business with internationally as well. So.
Yeah, and just that second bullet under cash transactions is also kind of like that, but sort of in reverse in terms of money leaving the U.S. I think that's something that sort of a bank would look at if it's like a large cash transaction deposit and then immediately, or not even necessarily immediately, but wired out to a foreign country. And then sort of the last sort of broad category, just commercial account activity. I guess when one entity has a commercial account with another, if they're unwilling to provide certain documentation, like the articles of incorporation, for example, or audited financial statements, or if there's sort of a sudden increase in account activity, or there's little to none, and then it goes into spurts of large unusual activity. And then the third bullet point is the same kind of idea we've been discussing in terms of it involves dealings with an unusual country or one that you would not expect based on your due diligence. Or also even if they have several different commercial accounts, but there's no real reason for why that's the case. So that's another possible red flag as well. And so just to put the point on this red flags piece is, this is not an exhaustive list. There are quite a few others. The key point is that ideally you've built a risk-based profile at the identification and due diligence stages, and then the monitoring process is just about knowing, when any customer activity deviates from that, basically from that profile in a way that could potentially be problematic. So with that lens, if you're looking at it through that lens, then I think that's a good way to go about it. And I think that's it for me, Cornelius. I believe the next, best practice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. So, just building a little bit on those red flags, I think, we've got some good guidelines, best practices, examples, etc. on our website, in our fraud area. There's some great resources, compiled over the years, additional red flags, especially when it comes to card transactions, and so forth. And of course, as part of the ARA agreement, your agency agreement that you've signed as an agency, there's an additional document attached to that, which is called the Industry Agency Handbook. That Industry Agency Handbook has some, great information around how to accept cards, how to process cards, how to manage chargebacks, and also additional best practices just in general, So we are, as travel evolves, we are moving into more of an e-commerce environment naturally. That in its own way is presenting problems for us to identify a customer. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have experienced that. If you're receiving online bookings, it's very difficult to identify that customer. However, there are tools out there and available to you through your merchant and or through the banking environments that can help you identify those. And the list is, we've got a list in that document, but to name a few, you've got 3D Secure that you can use potentially. Now, not all GDSs sign up for that, but I know there's a slow uptake in the GDSs adopting that. There's other means as well for you to validate your customer. You can do address verification, which in some instances are free tools out there that you can use. We again have a whole list of free tools that you can access to do validation of a customer. Trying to book a ticket through you is not going to help you from a host agency perspective. If it's a B2B environment, you still need to do that due diligence on that B2B. But if you're just looking at a customer coming in trying to buy a ticket, there are a multitude of free resources out there on the web that will be able to help you identify who it is you're doing business with. And again, do go and visit our website. The other way you can help protect yourself is signing up, subscribe to our updates from ARC. Now, I know the font here is a little bit squishy, but you can select what you want to sign up for, and one of the options you have there is fraud alerts. So we do send out fraud alerts. When we did the unauthorized ticketing webinars, even prior to the webinar sessions there, we've been pushing out fraud alerts around the unauthorized ticketing issue. So do sign up for that. When Doug and the team see something, they normally push that out through that notification environment and inform the industry of what's happening out there. But of course, you can also sign up to our newsletters, and in that you'll find additional resources and points of interest around travel and statistics, etc., etc. But more importantly is signing up for that fraud alert, and that will help you out a lot. Apart from that, if you are suspicious of any frauds in your organization, send us an email. We've got stopfraud@arccorp.com, especially dedicated there for you as a hotline, basically, to send us through any of that information that you have on a specific consumer who's trying to book. Obviously it's going to be an e-commerce booking, card not present environment, and they're going to try, and they're going to, if they're trying to attempt to defraud you in one way or another, send that information to us. The team will respond. They might ask for additional information, but they can respond to you with some additional information. And of course, building on that, we've created a tool to actually help you self-service for those specific pieces of information for a consumer, and that's of course the ARC Risk Check tool. that's originally designed for manual checks. So if you're a smaller, mid-sized agency and your volume is of such a level that you can actually go and do manual checks, please use the tool and go and sign up to that, because that is a community-based environment where people who have already been caught out with a fraud log that as the issue in the system. So you downstream might not necessarily get affected by it as well. So that information is going to be there. You can make an informed decision. So normally it gives you a score, positive, negative, and so on. And again, if you are concerned, if you get a score that you can't make a decision on, there's a way for you to send us a message to ARC. And again, it comes into our inbox, and we will respond to it to see if we have any information on that. And normally, what we do is any of our card not present fraud or form of payment fraud that we see, a lot of the data that we collect on those specific transactions are again uploaded into the Perseus environment on which ARC risk check is built. So that information lives there and so on. So there's an easy and simple way for you, rather than waiting for us to respond to an email, for you to actually access that data firsthand and get updates from our data that we load almost weekly into that system. So just not doing a sales pitch, just creating awareness.
Yeah, and Cornelius,
helpful tool.
Yeah, I'd like to add about letting ARC know through that stop fraud at arccorp.com. So many agents, they get those, especially the emails that they know are coming from a fraudster, and they simply just delete them. If you could just forward it on to stop fraud at arccorp.com, especially if they have passenger names. Sometimes they have credit cards in there, but we literally look at every single one of them, because we will run in our system and continue to run looking for the next agency down the line. And we will then, if we find that someone new has issued a ticket for them, then we're going to reach out to that agency and just say, hey, tell me about, why the customer that ordered that, and then let them know, hey, you're really dealing with a fraudster. So you may be saving another agent, a whole lot of financial grief if you just let us know, because we really do look at every single one. We work every single one of those. And so it's just we look at it when I do my webinars or in my in-person seminars at industry events. I'm like, the agents are our neighborhood watch. They're letting us know what's going on, because no fraudsters contact an ARC. So anyway, just a big plug for letting us know what you're seeing. Thanks.
Yeah, the unfortunate part is someone's going to take a hit at some point. So and our motto is really, and we've been speaking to this for many years now, is collaboration, right? So yes, one of the agencies might potentially take a financial loss, but someone downstream is going to be safeguarded against that by sharing that information with us, and vice versa, right? So yeah, you might have taken a hit today, tomorrow you're being safeguarded because someone else is feeding that information in. And that's just the environment we're in. We can't ensure no liability for anything when a transaction is accepted. It's a business decision that you have to make. It's based on your risk appetite, that you're willing to take that risk in accepting that transaction. But be in the know and have the information and the tools to help you make decisions going forward. So you can be informed, and there are resources out there. We try and push out as many resources as possible. Participating in ARC Fraud Month hopefully is another avenue where you can obtain knowledge and best practices, to not just for yourself but also for your teams, and just creating awareness. And I think that is essential. And then again, our motto is collaborate. We try and collaborate with everyone, and ensuring that this environment, this payment environment, the travel industry environment, the whole ecosystem remains safeguarded. But a lot of this is at that entry point, at that point of sale where that transaction happens. We need that help. right there as well. So again, that's why we brought this emphasis on know your customer. You know, I know we started out high on, you know, business banking with needs, financial institution requirements, etc., legislation, state, federal government needs, etc., etc. But it really boils down to, you know, we all have a responsibility to ensure that the value, that value chain remains, you know, clean of bad transactions, fraudulent transactions, etc. And we've done some analysis on the back-end costs to run a chargeback, to, you know, take on an ADM, you know, running a disputing that chargeback, etc., etc. Sometimes it's just not worth it to do the cost. And then, of course, you've got that the additional cost of marketing that leg again. You've got the additional cost of selling that ticket again, and so on. So there's a lot of factors to consider, not just, you know, the fraud, not that just that one piece. There's normally a bigger cost to it. Let's see if we have any questions out there, and we'll answer that. I don't know if you guys want to interject on anything else, but yeah, we're happy to take on questions. So please type those in and send them over to us. We've got a few more minutes left to respond to them. So please do send us any questions.
We see one, Cornelius. We have an authorization form and a copy of the credit card and driver's license too. And I'm taking that as, does that protect them from a chargeback? Absolutely not.
Fortunately.
Yeah, unfortunately, 10, 15 years ago, maybe. But the key why it's a recommendation is when a new customer is sending in that information, you have more data points that you can score against. You can look at the email address, the telephone number. You know, is it a VoIP telephone number? There's free sites available that you can go and determine that. You know, like the photoshopped driver's licenses, passports. They'll Photoshop the front and back of the credit card. These are areas that they make a lot of mistakes that you can capitalize on and determine, whoa, if I didn't collect this, I might have actually issued that ticket or those tickets for this customer. Because remember, that black market travel agent, he ain't buying one. He's going to buy as many as he can get until something happens. ARC intervenes, the airline intervenes. The owner comes down to the frontline travel agent and says, why did you issue these eight tickets yesterday? Tell me about the customer. You know, something's going to happen, but in the meantime, you're up front getting more data points that you can score against and get a better idea. Like I said, count on them continuing to make mistakes and just the overall poor quality of the types of Photoshop documents that they're sending into you. So that's why we recommend it. But you also have to safeguard it. Don't put it in a folder on the, you know, in some unlocked shelf. You know, that's still information that you need to secure. And if it's bad, share it with ARC. Send it in.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and social media, you know, that's another easy avenue to go and identify someone. Normally, people will tell the whole world what they're up to via social media. So if you don't find a profile for someone on social media, maybe that person doesn't really exist. You know, but that's the percentages out of that is, you know, don't just rely on that as a factor, but that's another tool, a free tool available out there to you to try and validate.
All right.
All right. Well, we're coming up to the hour. I want to thank everybody, and of course Doug and Sohum for participating in this session. But Doug sticking with it the whole month. It's always a big month for us, for the two of us, driving this and bringing this to our stakeholders. I hope you guys have had obtained some good insights, good knowledge, and overview of everything that's happening within the industry from a fraud perspective, what's out there to help you, and so on. Of course, ARC is always available to you. Just reach out to us on that stopfraud@arccorp.com email. We will get to you. The team, I've got actually a note here in the question saying the team is always responding to the customers. So kudos to you guys on that. And again, thank you very much for everybody making this month a success, for participating, signing up to our webinars, and we love bringing you this information. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Cornelius.